believed that beautiful memories would always be a peaceful place to return to. Until one day I realized, some memories, no matter how radiant, can become traps laid out for pain. My name is Lillian Carter. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, in a white-roofed house with blue trim that sat along the Ashley River, where summers smelled like magnolias and winters were only chilly enough for my mother to add a scarf. Back then, I had no idea I was living in what people called rare happiness. My father, Jonathan Carter, was the kind of model man local churches often invited to speak at Easter services. He ran a small coastal real estate investment firm, smart and gentle. My mother, Margaret, was a high school art teacher, with amber eyes and a smile as warm as late autumn sunlight. Every night, she sat with me at an old wooden table to paint while Dad read the paper in the living room, occasionally chiming in with a short joke that always made her laugh, as if she were hearing it for the first time. Those years, before I turned 8, were vivid, like an untouched watercolor painting. Then, one spring morning, it all fell apart. My mom collapsed while teaching. The diagnosis was late-stage ovarian cancer. I didn't understand any of it. I just saw her grow tired, draw less, hide in her room more, her eyes dimming each day. Within 7 months, she was gone. No drawn-out goodbyes, no promises of seeing each other again. Only the eerie silence in hospital room 412, and the beeping machine that fell quiet as her hand slipped off the bed. My father seemed hollowed out. He didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't pull me into his arms to say everything would be okay. He just turned to stone, started leaving early and coming home late, and handed me off to a carousel of nannies who appeared like clockwork in this new version of life. I once thought he was grieving in an adult way, but as I got older, I understood. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the will to raise his daughter. 2 years later, at a fundraiser at St. Paul's Church, my dad introduced me to a woman named Veronica Hale. I was 10. She was about 38, with sun-kissed skin and voluminous curls that looked like they belonged in a summer fashion magazine. Veronica shook my hand with a caramel-sweet smile and then leaned in to whisper, "You'll be a good girl if you know how to listen." I didn't answer, but something in my gut told me. My home would no longer belong to me. 3 months later, they married. No big wedding, just a small riverbank gathering with a few close friends and a priest offering blessings. I wore a lilac floral dress, standing between Veronica and a girl I'd never met. Sierra, her daughter, same age as me but taller, with sharp eyes that knew how to glare. From the start, I tried. I wanted Veronica to hug me. I wanted a real stepmother. I wanted a sister to play and learn with. But instead, I became a shadow in my own home. Sierra got the larger bedroom, my mom's old room. Veronica said it was because Sierra had trouble sleeping and needed more space. Every morning, she had hot almond butter biscuits for breakfast. I had cold cereal in a plastic bowl, usually after Sierra was done. When I asked Dad why, he simply nodded. "Your stepmom has her own ways of organizing things. You should learn to adapt." Adapt. That word echoed in my head every time a new nanny corrected me to call Veronica Mom. Or when I was denied watercolor supplies because Sierra needed money for ballet classes. And my father? He slowly vanished. No more bedtime hugs. No more stories on rainy nights. Whenever I tried to talk about a rough day at school, his answer was, "Let's talk tomorrow. I'm in the middle of a deal." Day after day, I learned to stay silent. I watched Sierra flaunt new handbags while I stitched my old school uniform with mismatched thread. I heard Veronica talk about special courses for her daughter, while I needed permission just to join a free art session at the public library. But the deepest wound didn't come from missing things. It came from my father's empty gaze whenever I called his name. With a trembling voice, as if I was no longer his daughter, just a painful reminder of someone he didn't want to remember. I once lived in a house filled with sunlight and laughter, That house still stood, but it had gone cold, quiet, and I was merely a presence no one felt the need to notice. I lost my mother, but cruelty worse than death is being erased from the heart of someone alive who once claimed to love you. Mornings at my house began with Sierra yelling from upstairs, "Mom, my flat iron cord is busted." Veronica's heels clapped against the wooden stairs almost instantly, a rhythm of favoritism without apology. I was still folding napkins at the kitchen table when she passed by me like I didn't exist. Sierra perched on a high stool, sneering at the eggs I'd just cooked, then pushed the plate away. "You know, at Lindsay's house, they cook breakfast with white truffle oil?" I glanced at my own plate, cold scrambled eggs and a slice of dry bread, no butter. The fridge had cheese and strawberries, but I'd long learned not to touch Sierra's stuff. "Don't mind her, Lillian. You know these don't match Sierra's taste," Veronica said in a tone half reproach, half pity, then looked at me with that familiar glance. "You should learn to be more considerate." That sentence felt like a slap wrapped in politeness. I bit my lip and kept folding. The upstairs bathroom was meant for both of us, but I was rarely allowed in. A week ago, I found a handwritten note taped to the door, reserved for those who respect hygiene and personal style. Signed in purple ink, Sierra. I brought it up with Dad. He was reading the paper, coffee still steaming. I sat across from him, trying to sound calm. "I can't keep using the basement bathroom. It's damp, moldy, and the water heater doesn't work. Especially in the winter." He lowered the paper, looked at me like he hadn't heard my voice in weeks, then sighed. "You should be patient. Veronica says Sierra's very sensitive about her space." I froze. My words didn't matter. As long as Veronica found it reasonable, that was enough. He had become a different man, one who merely echoed his wife's words like a reprogrammed speaker. Sierra took horseback riding, pottery, yoga, even Italian lessons with a private tutor. Me? I once asked to join a summer writing class at the city's arts center. Veronica laughed like I'd just announced I wanted to move to Mars. "That's adorable, but summer funds are spoken for. Sierra needs prep for the Florida dance program." I didn't reply. Didn't cry. I just nodded. Then went upstairs, turned on my fan since the attic A/C broke back in February. No one fixed it. Dad once promised to take me to an art exhibit in Savannah. My mom's favorite painter, Alma Thomas. We planned it together. But right before the trip, Veronica mentioned a charity gala needing his presence. He said, flatly, "Maybe next time, Lillian. This is more important." I remember exactly what I did that day. I walked nearly an hour to the library, dug through old archives, and found a worn-out book about Alma. I spent the entire afternoon reading, taking notes on each painting. That was the day I learned some beautiful things were never meant to be mine. Gradually, Veronica began telling acquaintances about Jonathan's child from his previous marriage. Lillian. She's a bit shy and doesn't really socialize. She'd say it during cocktail parties, just as I passed by with a tray of juice, as if she had tried her best, but some kids are just born distant. I once overheard her on the phone, thinking I was asleep. "That girl drains me. She's always so quiet, gloomy, like a shadow in this house." I don't blame Jonathan, but I can't live under that cloud of negativity forever. Negativity? I had learned how not to disturb, not to make noise, not even to breathe too loud when she had guests. And still, I was considered a burden. One time, I forgot my raincoat and came home soaking wet. Veronica stood at the door holding a mop. "Wipe the floor before stepping in. The rug is brand new." I dried each drop falling from my hair, my muddy clothes clinging to me as I shivered. She just stood there with her arms crossed. Sierra looked down from the stairs, smirking. "You should have checked the weather. How careless can you be going to school like that?" No one took my side. No one asked, Are you okay? That's when I started keeping a journal, not to retell the days, but so I wouldn't explode. The pages became the only place I could speak the truth. I drew nameless faces, women screaming in silence, rooms with doors that wouldn't lock, empty chairs at six-person dinner tables. One day, Sierra was featured in the school magazine after winning a fashion design contest. Veronica showed that magazine to neighbors, to the principal, even to my former teachers. As for me, I was called downstairs only to pose for a family photo to be printed on Christmas cards. I was placed at the edge, like a decorative item no one really needed. They gradually built a perfect world, one where I existed only when they needed to prove Veronica's kindness. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't screamed at. I wasn't starved. But I was turned into something no one wanted to admit was there. No one had to yell in my face that I wasn't loved. All they had to do was look through me, like I wasn't even there. I was in American history class when my teacher walked up, placed her hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "Lillian, someone's here to pick you up." Before I could ask, I saw Veronica standing outside the window, wearing a charcoal gray suit and a face as stiff as the bronze statue in the St. Matthew Church Hall. No one spoke on the drive home. Only when we neared the house did she speak, her voice dry and flat, like a weather forecast. "Your father had a stroke in his office this morning. He didn't make it." My breath caught. The word stroke rang in my head like a bell dropped into deep water. I flung open the door and ran inside, but the living room looked pristine, eerily untouched. His office door was locked. Veronica said the police had taken the files. Then she turned and left me in the cold silence. No one took me to the hospital. No final goodbye. No familiar old jacket he used to cover me when I dozed off on the couch. Just a few distant relatives gathered at the funeral, their eyes sliding past me like I was a random guest at an overly formal event. Sierra sat beside her mother in a fitted black dress with a brand new pearl necklace. I wore a faded dress borrowed from my dorm mate. No one asked what I needed. No one asked if I was okay. I didn't cry in front of them. I just stood there, like a stranger among people pretending to mourn. After the service, the only person who came up to me was my father's cousin, Raymond. Uncle Ray, as I used to call him. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said gently, "Lillian, I'm really sorry. I know. This isn't easy." I nodded. I couldn't speak. A few weeks later, my father's attorney called me to his downtown Savannah office for the reading of the will. I walked into the wood-paneled conference room, the same one where my dad had signed million-dollar deals, now reduced to the setting for a truth I wasn't ready for. At the table, attorney Ed Wallace read each line aloud. Assets, including the Riverfront estate, equity and Carter Holdings, trust funds and life insurance, will be entrusted to Mrs. Veronica Hale Carter and her daughter, Miss Sierra Hale Carter. Each word hit like a hammer. Miss Lillian Carter will receive the remaining balance in the education fund to complete her undergraduate studies at the University of Georgia, along with a one-time cash allocation of $8,000. I stared down at my hands. My fingernails trembled. My lungs squeezed tight. $8,000. Enough to buy a used car, maybe cover 6 months of rent, but hardly something you'd call a father's legacy to his daughter. I turned to Veronica. She leaned back in her chair, chin tilted, eyes as cold as stone. Did my father really write it like that? She smiled, her first of the entire meeting. "Your father wanted you to learn independence. He always said Lillian needs to rely on herself. He believed you'd been coddled long enough." I stood up, pushed the chair back hard enough for the wheels to screech. When I got home, everything had changed. My room had been cleared, my belongings packed into 3 cardboard boxes labeled in red marker. On the desk lay a printed sheet. "Dorm life is a better fit for your stage of development." Below it, Veronica's unmistakable squiggled signature. Sierra walked by, holding a matcha smoothie in one hand and chewing a gummy in the other, grinning like I was some clumsy character in a high-society family drama. Mom said you should move out soon. We need the space this weekend for guests from New York. I carried my 3 boxes and quietly left the house I used to call home, now a luxury inn for 2 people who shared no blood with me. There were no hugs goodbye. No one asked where I'd stay, what I'd eat, how I'd sleep. I stepped out the gate, the summer wind blowing a strand of tear-damp hair across my cheek. The third-floor apartment in Edgewood, on the east side of Atlanta, was only about 430 square feet, with a low ceiling and warped wooden floors in spots. But when I placed my mother's photo on the windowsill and taped a few of my sketches on the wall, it became home. I worked 3 part-time jobs during my senior year. Mornings making coffee at an indie cafe near campus, afternoons at the university's art library, and evenings tutoring 2 kids from a Korean family in Decatur. Occasionally, I did commissioned portraits by mail for a couple $100. Each month, after paying rent, food, and supplies, I managed to save about $130. One month, I had to choose between replacing my worn-out brushes or buying a bus ticket to Veronica's Orthodox Church memorial for my father. I chose the brushes. There would be a memorial every year, but passion couldn't wait. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in applied arts from Georgia State and landed a job at a private gallery in Asheville, North Carolina, a place of blue mountains and instinct-driven artists. The gallery owner, Evelyn May, was in her 60s, dressed like she'd stepped out of the 70s, and had eyes sharp as blades. She didn't care where I came from. She only asked, "Do you know what real art is?" I said, "It's something that makes you see yourself while looking at someone else." She nodded and assigned me to manage works from emerging artists, people who'd never sold a single piece but had fire in their strokes. I started cataloging paintings, writing descriptions, setting up exhibits, and giving weekend tours. Every time a guest asked for an artist's contact info, I felt a warmth inside, like placing a hand over an old flame. Over the past 3 years, I moved from a temp contract worker to the visual arts program coordinator. I didn't earn much, but it was enough. No one here knew whose daughter I was, where I had lived, or how I had been erased from my own family's story. I became who I was. No pedigree attached. Veronica sent Christmas cards every year, sometimes with a photo in front of the tree at their new mansion. Sierra stood center, glowing in a red velvet dress, Veronica beside her with a champagne flute. In the bottom corner, always a handwritten note. "Hope you're doing well. V." Never a real question, never a phone call. I tore the cards without opening them. The past stopped getting a reaction from me. I no longer waited for my father in dreams, or tried to justify the will by imagining he'd been pressured. I stopped pitying myself. I didn't need recognition. I needed space. Space to define myself on my own terms. One March afternoon, while adjusting the layout for an exhibit by a young Haitian painter, I got an email from a small gallery in Brooklyn. They invited me to join as a curator for their Art After Grief program, a series focused on creativity born from personal loss. They'd read my piece in an independent art magazine on the connection between pain and artistic expression. It took me a week to decide. Asheville had become a place I was thankful for, but I needed to step beyond comfort. Brooklyn wasn't just an opportunity, it was my next step. The first one not directed by anyone but myself. I left Asheville on a foggy morning with 2 suitcases, one filled with clothes and essentials, the other packed with all my drawings, sketches, and 3 journals I kept throughout college. I didn't look back. Didn't take a farewell photo. My new apartment in Crown Heights was smaller, rent was twice as high, but it overflowed with light. I painted at night, set a cactus on the windowsill, and taped my mother's old card to the wall. The ink slightly smudged. "Always face the light, my daughter." I didn't need Veronica. I didn't need Sierra. I didn't need my father beside me. Not because I forgot them, but because I no longer had to prove I was worthy of them. I lived. I moved. I stood. And that alone was enough for me to keep going. On a rainy Friday afternoon in Brooklyn, With just a few guests lingering in the back of the gallery, he walked in. A long coat draped over one arm, slightly damp hair, tall frame, a stride that wasn't rushed but unmistakably firm. Not someone who sought attention, someone who quietly drew it. I was repositioning an artist bio when he stopped in front of Corinne Liao's painting. Back porch after the funeral. The emotion here. There's no comfort, but no bitterness either, he said, voice deep and even. She's not telling a story. She's opening a space for you to walk into. I turned, a little surprised. Most guests only asked how much the paintings cost, or whether we sold prints. You know Corinne? I asked. Only from her interview in Drift magazine. But I remember this one. Back then it was just a sketch. I nodded, caught off guard. I used to think it was just a draft, but when she sent the final, I couldn't stop looking at it. He looked at me then, bright-eyed but not imposing. You run the gallery? I manage the temporary exhibits. I also curate and write the introductions, I replied, not trying to impress. He smiled, not politely, but like he'd just found something in tune. I'm Beckett. I shook his hand. Lillian. I didn't ask for his last name. Didn't need to know. But when he walked away, he left a card on the table. I glanced down. A silver-edged business card read, Beckett Vaughn, Chief Executive Officer, Arcwave Technologies. The name had once flashed past me in an article on innovators in regenerative medicine. But what made me remember Beckett wasn't his title. It was how he didn't make me feel small standing beside his success. The next day, I got an email from him. I've been thinking about that painting. If you're free, I'd love to buy you a coffee, just a conversation about art, or anything worth saying. I replied that Tuesday afternoon would work. We sat at a small cafe on Atlantic Avenue, the kind that didn't play background jazz or display philosophy books to impress anyone. Beckett had arrived 5 minutes before I did, already sipping a plain black coffee and reading something on his tablet. When I sat down, he closed it immediately. Our conversation lasted longer than expected. From abstract art to post-war expressionism, from why I believed art could heal, to the story of how he gave up his PhD program to start a company because of a younger brother who'd suffered neurological damage in an accident. What I fear most isn't failure, he said, eyes steady. It's watching someone I love slowly become a shadow in their own life. My throat tightened. Not because of what he shared, but because it stirred something I had buried deep. I used to be that shadow, in my own home, I said, my fingers tightening around the ceramic cup. After my mom passed, I was quietly replaced. No screaming, no rejection. Just slipped out of my old seat in someone else's heart. Beckett didn't press for details. He didn't look at me with pity. He just let me speak. No interruptions, no attempts to explain my pain for me. They kicked me out of the house. After my dad died, they said I was old enough to live on my own. The will left everything to the woman he married after my mom. Me? Enough to pay for my last semester. That was it. I don't remember how much I said. I just remember Beckett sitting there, silent but never absent. At the end, when we stood up to leave, he said, You don't need anyone to validate your worth, but if someday you forget, I'll remind you. I didn't respond, but when I got home, I opened the half-finished article on my laptop and typed a single line. Some people don't knock on the door. Because they're not here to come in, they're here to sit beside you. From that day on, Beckett dropped by the gallery often. Sometimes with pastries, sometimes just standing quietly while I adjusted the lights. I didn't hide parts of myself. I didn't hide the exhaustion. Didn't hide the ragged dreams that still visited me. He didn't need me to be perfect to love me. He just needed me to be real. I never thought I'd find someone like that. Not loud, not full of promises, but always present, in the right way at the right time. Like the painting Back Porch after the funeral. Not soothing, but not leaving either. just holding you in silence when you no longer believe anyone would stay. One afternoon in mid-October, while reviewing a lighting plan for the upcoming exhibit, I received a parcel, an ivory envelope with faint gold trim. The italic font read, "The Hale Carter Foundation cordially invites you." I stood frozen for a moment as a chill breeze from the open window brushed the back of my neck. Below the formal print was a messy handwritten line in purple ink. "Lillian, it's been too long. The family hopes to see you, Veronica." Nothing in those 2 sentences felt sincere. Family? That word hadn't been used for me in almost 10 years. I took the letter home and placed it on the kitchen counter. Beckett was making lasagna, sleeves rolled up, dark shirt slightly damp with sweat around the shoulders. He glanced at the envelope. "Who's it from?" "Veronica Hale. Fundraising gala for the Savannah Children's Hospital," under the family foundation's name. I uncorked the wine and poured a small glass, slowly. "The best part? I recognized that name yesterday on the list of partner sponsors from your side." Beckett paused and looked at me more closely. "You're talking about the Hale Carter Foundation?" I nodded. "This year's gala is organized by the board, with financial support from an anonymous donor. And according to the latest internal memo from Arcwave Philanthropy, that anonymous source is Beckett Vaughn." He set the knife down on the counter. "They don't know I'm involved?" "Clearly not. My name is now Lillian Vaughn. I've been off social media since moving to New York. No one's following, no one knows. I've kept it quiet because I didn't want the shadow of the past seeping into everything I've built." Beckett was quiet for a moment, then sat down next to me. "What do you want to do?" I swirled the wine, the glass catching the kitchen light in an amber tint. Part of me wants to throw that invitation into the oven and let the ashes prove the past is dead, but another part is curious. I looked up at him. "What do you think?" Beckett tilted his head, then answered slowly, like weighing each word. "You don't owe them a handshake, a greeting, or even your presence. But if you think there's something you need to close, then go. Not to make peace, to end it. On your own stage, no more lowering your head." I set the glass down. "If I go, I want to go alone first. You come in later. No grand entrance. Only when they still think I'm the girl they kicked out with 2 cardboard boxes. Then you show up, not to flaunt, but to expose the truth." Beckett looked at me for a long time. His eyes didn't judge or approve, just held unwavering trust. "Okay. But only if you're sure. If you feel off at any moment, I'll come in, no script, no plan." I nodded. In the days leading up, I chose a sapphire blue silk dress from an independent designer our gallery once worked with. Not flashy, not extravagant, but the cut hugged my shoulders and waist with quiet precision. Enough to walk into any room carrying the presence of someone who knows her worth. On the morning of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror for a while. Not to adjust anything, but to truly see myself. The woman in the reflection no longer hid along the cold hallway of her old house. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders straight, her lips steady, no longer trembling at the memory of what was lost. I arrived at the Emerson Hotel at 6:30. The main entrance glowed with golden lights, cream-colored carpet stretching inward, guests drifting past the reception where a young woman in black uniform checked names. I stood tall and spoke, just loud enough but firm. "Lillian Vaughn." She nodded, smiling. "Welcome to the Hale Carter Charity Gala. You're seated at table 2. I walked into the grand ballroom like I was standing on solid ground of my own making. No one by my side, no one clearing the path. I saw Veronica first. She was surrounded by older guests, deep red gown, curled hair just like years ago, raising a wine glass toward familiar names in the regional finance scene. Next to her was Sierra, in a white crystal-embellished gown, a Chanel watch on her wrist. They were laughing. Until Sierra's gaze landed on me. She paused for a beat, then whispered something into her mother's ear. Veronica turned her head. Her face stiffened for less than half a second before that perfect smile returned. like I was some pitiful ghost who had wandered into the wrong party. She walked over, the soft clicks of her heels echoing on the marble floor. Lillian, what a surprise. I didn't expect you to come. But still, I'm very glad to see you here. I smiled. Are you invited? I just responded. That answer darkened Veronica's gaze for a flicker. She nodded and stepped aside for Sierra. Sierra lifted her chin. I didn't think you'd show up. Mom thought you were still busy running some tiny gallery in Brooklyn. I looked her straight in the eyes. That gallery gets more international visitors than the number of boyfriends you've cycled through in the past 3 years. Sierra's hand tightened slightly around her wine glass. I just figured you had no reason to show up at any family events. I shrugged. Some wounds don't need healing. They just need to be looked at directly. Before they could fire back, I turned and walked away, leaving behind 2 people who never really noticed what they had lost. Beckett would be here in a few minutes. I was chatting with an elderly couple, donors to the art therapy program I used to lead, when the mic on the stage crackled. Veronica stepped up, her crimson gown hugging her slim frame, chin raised like she was performing in a classical drama. Before the dinner officially begins, I'd like to take a moment to recognize those who've contributed to tonight's success, she said, voice booming through the speakers. We're deeply grateful to every member of the organizing team, to all the servers, and even to those who seem to have mistaken their roles tonight. She turned her gaze toward me. A few heads followed. I stayed still, glass in hand, spine upright. Lillian, Veronica called in a mockingly sweet tone. Didn't we say that catering staff should use the service entrance in the back? Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. A few phones were raised. I heard Sierra whisper to a friend, trying not to laugh too loudly. Maybe she just misses her intern days at those little art cafes. Sierra raised an eyebrow with a smirk. Mom, she's always been confused about where she belongs. Veronica chuckled softly, feigning embarrassment. Maybe we should help her back to the right place. Security? A man in a black suit approached, eyes uncertain. No one asked for credentials. No one checked my invitation. I smiled slightly and handed him my wine glass. If you touch me, I'll sue you for removing a formally registered guest. I said loud enough, eyes still locked on Veronica. Veronica stepped closer, her shoulders twitching as she tried to hide the bitterness. Lillian, don't make a scene. This evening isn't for people who show up where they don't belong. I didn't get a chance to reply before a man's voice cut through from the entrance. Then allow me to clarify who does belong. The air froze in a single breath. Every eye turned toward the doors, where Beckett strode in. Black tuxedo sharp, hair slicked back, face carved in cold stone. Beckett Vaughn, someone whispered, CEO of Arcwave Technologies. Veronica stepped back, lips drained of color. Sierra stared, unblinking. Beckett walked straight to me, took my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Are you okay? I nodded. He turned to Veronica. Did you just try to kick my wife out of an event I personally sponsored? Veronica's mouth dropped open. She's your wife? Beckett didn't answer. He pulled out a copy of the gala invitation mailed to our house and held it up. This is an official invitation. She didn't crash the event. She didn't impersonate anyone. She's serving no one here but herself, and the person behind tonight's largest donation, am offended. The ballroom fell silent as ice. Somewhere across the room, a glass shattered. Sierra spoke up awkwardly. I didn't know she got married. She never made it public. Beckett glanced at her, unmoved. You were filming your mother humiliating my wife just now? That's pretty public. Sierra blushed, quickly stuffing her phone into her purse. A few other guests began murmuring. The man next to me cleared his throat deliberately. Veronica tried to recover, voice trembling. If I had known she was... I didn't mean... Beckett cut her off. It's because you didn't know that you acted this way. The way you define someone's worth. By what they wear, which door they enter, how much money they have, or who's standing beside them, is what I find appalling. He turned to the crowd. My organization funded this event to support the community, not to reinforce a system that excludes and humiliates someone abandoned by her own family. I stepped forward. Thank you, Beckett, but the rest I need to say myself. I turned to face Veronica, Sierra, and a few faces that once felt familiar. You once said I wasn't good enough to carry the Carter name. Today, I stand here with no need for that name. No inheritance list, no house that isn't mine. I locked eyes with her. You shoved me out the door like I was disposable. Now it's those very doors you opened that led me to a place where you no longer get to decide who belongs in the room. No one spoke. No one stepped in. One by one, people shifted to the side. The weight didn't come from anger, but from truth. So glaring, no one dared to deny it. I stepped back beside Beckett. His hand tightened around mine. He looked up at the organizers and said, firmly, if someone like my wife isn't welcome here, then Arcwave will withdraw all future support. You'll need to find a sponsor more aligned with the values you actually live by. The atmosphere wavered. One of the organizers hurried over. Mr. Vaughn, perhaps we handled this poorly. Please reconsider. Beckett remained cold. I'll never fund poor handling. I fund kindness. 2 days after the gala, my inbox overflowed with subject lines that read like a joke. We need to talk. Brendan sent flowers to the gallery, a bunch of white tulips with a scribbled card. I've always cared about you, things just went too far. Madeline, Uncle Raymond's daughter, messaged me on LinkedIn. You're incredibly brave. I hope we can talk again someday, like we used to. No one mentioned what had happened outright. No one admitted fault. They sent words polished and selected like gold leaf over a rotting frame. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I no longer owed anyone a role in the stage play called conditional reconciliation. The only person I reached out to was Janet, my father's younger sister. She called one quiet afternoon, her voice as soft as breath. Lillian, if you're willing, I'd love to invite you for coffee. No pressure to talk. I just want to listen. We met at a small cafe in Carroll Gardens. Janet had arrived early, still wearing that simple look, a wool sweater, worn leather shoes, nothing like the rest of them. I stayed silent for too long, she began. No excuses. I saw how Veronica treated you. I didn't speak up because I was afraid of being pushed out, just like you were, and that's what I'm most ashamed of. I stirred my coffee, saying nothing. Your father, he used to show up at my house late at night, unannounced. He'd just sit outside and smoke. Once he said, Jeanette, I think I lost my daughter. I tightened my grip on the ceramic cup. Janet exhaled, eyes stinging. He was weaker than people realized. I'm not defending him, but I want you to know. He didn't forget you. He just didn't have the strength to stand beside you, especially when everyone else insisted you didn't belong. We stayed for nearly an hour. Not to dig up old wounds, but to face them. No filters, no retreat. When Janet stood to leave, she held my hand for a long moment. You'll let me, she said. I'd like to start again, not just as your aunt on paper, but as someone who's present, who listens. I nodded. No promises. No tears. Just a small door, cracked open. A week later, Beckett and I sat in his attorney's office, signing the founding papers for the Jonathan Carter Art Therapy Fund. I kept my father's name, not to forgive, but to redefine. The foundation's mission is to support art programs in children's hospitals, especially for kids who've experienced family loss. We started in Brooklyn, then expanded to Asheville and Savannah. The launch event took place at a public library. No champagne, no elaborate stage. Just paintings by children who'd been abandoned, who'd lost loved ones, who had seen the world grow cold too soon. I gave a short speech, No retelling of the past, no mention of Veronica or Sierra. I simply said, "Some children are never called by their real names in the houses they grow up in. Some adults need a different language to express their pain. Art doesn't save people, but it can hold them long enough for trust to start coming back, piece by piece." The crowd was quiet, no loud applause, but one little girl at the back, short hair just like I had at 8, looked up at me like I'd touched something she hadn't dared name. Beckett squeezed my hand as we stepped out of the library. "You've changed what people think family means," he said. I leaned into his shoulder. "Family isn't who gives birth to us or who lives under the same roof, it's who stays, when all we have left is ourselves." I haven't forgotten what happened. I don't erase the memories. I've learned to live with them, so that when someone says family is forever, I can answer, only if they choose to stay with a genuine heart. I no longer wait for those who once turned their backs. I'm too busy living alongside those who chose to hold my hand, even when there was nothing to gain. In a world where blood ties once felt like chains, I choose connection through trust, no birth certificate required. Just a look that doesn't turn away. Lillian's story proves that family isn't defined by blood, but by presence and unconditional love. In real life, many have been deeply hurt by the very people who were supposed to protect them. But like Lillian, anyone can learn to rise, rebuild their self-worth, and find family in kind, intentional relationships. No one should have to endure abuse just because they share a last name. Freedom often begins with the courage to draw a boundary. What do you think about Lillian's journey? Have you ever gone through something similar? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, powerful stories about life and family.